We're live.
I have live now, Chief. All right, good afternoon for June 28th, Fire Engineering's Google Hangout, and we are trying this again. We just had a run-through, which was the actual best introduction of our sponsor, TenCate, they've ever heard Chief Halton give, and we're disappointed to hear that we had some technological problems, and it actually didn't go. But the good news is now we have Chief Rubin on. So I'm going to go through real quick. We have Chief Dennis McCarthy here with me today in Fairfield, Connecticut.
Invite, please.
Chief Dennis Rubin on, and he'll tell us all of us about his exciting new venture. I don't want to say a new chief because he's been chief a couple times now, but in a new department in Maryland. And we have Chief Halton joining us from Tulsa today. Today we're going to be talking about fireground safety. I was recently approached by a firefighter from a large urban city. He says, "Man, I really such a safety guy, and that's not going to allow us to be, aggressive on the fire ground anymore." So we got into a really good spirited conversation on fireground safety and still having good solid tactics and some traditional tactics as well. So that's what I want to kind of open that up to today. So we're going to open it up to our panel, but we're also going to open it up to everybody watching through Twitter. So if you have questions or want to get involved in this conversation, hashtag FE Talk will get you right into the conversation. I'm monitoring Twitter here, so as soon as I can break in with your question, we'll get that to the panel here and share your information. So before we let Chief Rubin and Chief McCarthy introduce themselves, we're going to go to Chief Halton for a quick mention of our sponsor, TenCate Fabrics.
Hey, thank you so much, BJ. And we do want to do a quick shout out to TenCate Fabrics. This company's been around since the 1600s. They used to make sails for the Dutch Navy. That's how long they've been in business. And they're a unique company. Today we're going to be talking about the fireground and safety. And I think few things are as taken for granted as the actual fabric that we use in our PPE and in our firefighter fatigues, whether you're wearing station wear or whatever you're wearing. And whether you know it or not, 9 out of 10 firefighters are wearing TenCate fabrics, right? So these are the good folks that make the actual fabric that you have in your gear. And what's really neat about what TenCate does, and while we're talking about safety, is that the TenCate fabrics are unique in a very specific way. If I was going to take a piece of cotton or whatever and make it fire resistive, I would have to put all kinds of chemicals into it. And if you remember back to the big mattress controversy we had several years ago, particularly in California, where the mattresses were being infused with so many chemicals that they were actually too toxic to lay down on. So we always want to be careful about introducing chemicals into what we wear or what we sleep on or what we sit on, right? Because it's a pretty chemical heavy environment. And anytime that things get exposed to unusual heating, right, we start to have off-gassing, right? It's the beginning stages of pyrolysis. We call it quantitative decomposition. So as things start to off-gas or degrade, those fire-resistant chemicals will off-gas. What's unique about TenCate, and what every firefighter needs to know about TenCate, is that they don't do that. The fabrics they use are inherently fire resistive. So there's no chemicals being pumped into the TenCate fabrics in order to make them fire resistive, which is a really, 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 really cool thing. And TenCate is a really cool company. They're down in Georgia. That's where they make their gear here from the United States. They're run by a dear friend of mine, or a dear friend of mine's involved with the company down there. My buddy Mike, who's a super guy. They're great supporters of FDIC, great supporters of fire engineering. But over and above all of that, they're great people. So if you get the job to spec gear, which is a kind of a wonky job to get, right? You're going to have to learn about total thermal loss and heat protection and total personal protective thermal protection, and you're going to have to balance that, right? How much do I want my fabric to wick away moisture? How much thermal protection do we need? And it can be kind of daunting. TenCate can help you get through that maze. They can show you what fabrics you may want to use for your environment, for the kind of structural firefighting that you use, and they work with all the major manufacturers. They work with everybody. So they're a great company, great supporters of you, and wonderful people. And we just want to do a quick thank you to everybody who submitted to FDIC. We had 1,100 some odd submissions, which is a lot of reading for me, but thank you so much for doing that. We can't wait to go through the selection process. We're really looking forward to it. We thank you so much for your support and kindness there. And if you plan on going to FDIC, register now so you'll have a room which is a big deal. Apparently, having a place to sleep matters. So we hope you do that. It's going to be a great show today. Remember, hashtag FETalk. I'll be keeping my eye on it. PJ will be keeping his eye on it. And that way you can join into the conversation about fireground operations and safety.
That was a great thanks to Takata for all that they do for us for this show, but also for fire engineering and FDIC. So thanks, Chief. Chief Rubin, thanks for joining us today. And why don't you tell everybody, I know most of our followers are very familiar with you, but I know you have a new job position closer here in the East Coast of Maryland. So if you want to just quickly talk about that, and then we'll get to Chief McCarthy.
Chief, what an honor, first of all, to be on this program with you, along with Bobby Halton, Chief McCarthy, and all the other people who have been on prior. I know it's just a great opportunity, and thank you so much. On May 15th, I took over as the 18th Fire Chief for the city of Petersburg, Virginia. We're about 20 miles south of the city of Richmond. We operate 4 fire stations, 4 engines, 1 ladder, a battalion chief, and we protect about 40,000 people. One of the great attractions to this is it's about 112 miles to see my grandson, who is an amazing skater at the age of 12. Just saying, led all of Maryland in points and assists and goals last year. So we're really, really proud of him. Just glad to be back home, back in the Southeastern Division of the International Association of Fire Chiefs as well, Paul.
Oh, congratulations, Chief. I'm very happy for you.
Tell the truth, Ruben. You're just glad to be closer to the Nats and
Yes, sir. Grandson first, but the Nationals, the Capitals, and the Redskins are all tattooed to my arm, sir. So you got that exactly right. I wonder, before we get too deep into the discussion, if PJ would allow me to talk a minute more about fabrics. Is that a possibility? And this is going to be a question for Chief Halton, or a comment or something to please get our great sponsor. And I'm very familiar with them. I've always bought their products. When I was in Atlanta, they'd invite us over. But one element has been just missing in our business for quite a while, and that is to develop a pressure burn garment that is fire resistive or protective. I've had many firefighters, unfortunately, burned during my watch. I can go over their names and backgrounds and details, but I think to a person, if they're able to return to duty, they fight very diligently, very hard. They probably return too soon. The first time, it was about 1985, Greg Flager, who produced a program called To Hell and Back in Mesa, Arizona, very close friend. And when he showed up, he had a pressure garment, and the pressure garment is to prevent scar tissue from continuing to develop. And he insisted on being back in the line. So what I had was a person wearing a flammable garment who had already received tremendous burns. And quite frankly, I've probably experienced 4 or 5, at least, more firefighters itching, pun and in reality, to get back on the line after significant burns wearing burn garments. There really needs to be an answer. Takata probably is the very best research agency along the way that can come up with something that would help specifically firefighters, but I would suspect anybody who has to wear a pressure garment when they've had burn injury. And that's a question, a comment, and a statement, all for Chief Halton.
Well, and thank you for bringing that forward, and I'll certainly follow it. And it goes along with the initiative that Penwell and Sons of the Flag are working on. Right now, we're working on trying to get state-of-the-art advances in burn care through the system, so to speak, right? And it's always the system. So when we're talking about a fire-resistant pressure garment, that's going to have to get past the FDA, and God bless them. It's important that they do so, because there's high risk, right? The folks who get burnt are at high risk for the rest of their lives and go through multiple surgeries. Being burnt is a serious event that affects you for literally the rest of your life, especially when we see childhood burns, which are heartbreaking, because that individual, as they grow, are going to need help. And so pressure garments that are fire resistant, I'll speak with Michael after this webcast and see what Takata is doing, and also bring it forward to the Sons of the Flag as one of our initiatives to try to move it through the system there. And if you want to help the Sons of the Flag, on September the 20th, they're going to throw me out of an airplane. And wow. Yeah, and if you want to help support that effort, You can donate as little as $5, which is a cup of coffee. If you go to Bird's Eye View Project, you'll see a thing called Bombshells or Patriots. But on September the 20th, I'll put a link up after this. Or if you go to bobbyhalton.com, it's on my page. You can donate as little as $5 or as much as you want, but I'm trying to raise 10 grand. Mike Dugan is going to do it with me. We're going to get thrown out of the plane, not together, but on the same day. So it'll be an interesting day. And it's all for Sons of the Flag, which is a great organization run by a former Navy SEAL, Ryan Parrott. And I'll make sure that this gets front and center on their agenda.
Chief, if I don't have to jump with you, I'm going to put in $50 and I'll challenge any and everybody on Google Hangout to do the same today. $50 from the Rube. And again, please don't make me jump.
I won't, and I'll put the link up right now with #FETalk, so you'll be able to. Thank you for doing that, Chief.
Yes, sir. What an honor.
Well, Chief, that was a great question and statement. It was good to hear about the endeavors of Chief Walton jumping out of an airplane. Hopefully he jumps out before Chief Dugan.
Safely.
I love to hear that. I'd like to introduce my guest here today. I'm lucky enough to be attending a training class in Fairfield, Connecticut, in the beautiful new training center in Fairfield. And I happened to bump into Chief McCarthy this morning. So I quickly pulled him in and asked if he'd like to join us today. And he definitely took the opportunity. But I'd like to introduce Chief McCarthy to the World of Fire Engineering Google Hangouts. You can tell everybody a little bit about yourself,
Sure.
And then we'll get into the topic for today.
Well, PJ, thank you very much for inviting me to join in. And let me start off with, I will match Chief Rubin's pledge, having spent many years riding for wounded warriors from DC to Gettysburg. Certainly appreciate the opportunity to continue that support. So let me be the first to match that challenge from Chief Rubin.
Thank you, Chief.
I am a chief to be able to work for 3 different departments. Spent the bulk of my career in Westport, the neighboring community, and I was there for 27 years. Chief in Norwalk, 2 towns over, for 10 years, and had the opportunity to come here to my hometown. And just like Chief Rubin, being closer to home and not having to get on I-95 in Southwest Connecticut is a real advantage. But we in the state of Connecticut and certainly in Fairfield have focused on firefighter safety from a variety of different viewpoints, and I'm really honored to be able to join you here today.
Great. Well, Chief, we're very happy to have you. I know Chief Walton's very happy to have you now for multiple reasons, but now you match Chief Rubin's donation there. I think he's got a little bigger smile right now, so thank you for doing that. So let's get into this a little bit. And, Chief Rubin, as you know, you've been a chief in some pretty large departments across the country, and you've done a phenomenal job in those departments. And I know I've had some conversations regarding fireground safety and some of the things that you inherited in one of the departments that you took over. And as a chief officer, that over topic of safety is just so big. And we have some of the ground troops who are concerned with, if everything's safety, and if everything's safety, we can't do our job properly, or they can't do their job properly. And I'm not sure where the disconnect is, because I'm still pretty close to the ground troops, and I clearly see that we can really do our job, in my opinion, safer and smarter, but still have good, solid, aggressive, that terminology, aggressive, traditional tactics to do what we need to do, going in and search, making the grabs, making the rescues, fighting fire when appropriate. I think we can still do all that stuff, and we should be doing that because that's what we're here for. But I also think there's a layer of safety that sometimes we may miss on the fire ground. So, Chief Rubin, you come into a department, or you take your departments, however you want to look at it, and where should we be looking at the chief officer level, and what items should we really be communicating with our company officers to make sure that we're working on being safe, but also still uphold the mission of the fire service?
Chief Norwood, I would say that have a open and frank discussion go over what the chief's expectation are, which I've done each time that I've taken over the helm of an organization. And we talk about the things that are negotiable, perhaps like maybe cleaning the fire station or the days that we do preventative maintenance, and things that are not negotiable, such as firefighter safety, wearing a seatbelt, stopping at a stop sign. But if you'll allow, that first comment you made was so powerful, we're not going to be able to do our job because I'd like to address that with two quick stories, if you'll allow me.
Go ahead, Chief.
Good. I think we hit a stall there, and it may have been my fault. The Sandy Lee story always comes to mind. Sandy Lee was a young firefighter in Prince George's County, Maryland, when they received a dispatch for a building, an apartment on fire. With that said, as Sandy Lee mounted the apparatus that day, it was ladder truck 22 at Tuxedo Chevrolet, she slipped and fell out of the jump seat. Her story is best described, and it ran in Fire Engineering magazine quite a while ago as Caught Under the Wheels. That day, Sandy Lee lost one leg. Her stomach contents were eviscerated. She was in a trauma center for an extended period of time, over 400 whole pints of blood. Tremendous videotape was put together. Her leadership has been amazing. What a great friend, what a great person. But she closes that program, Chief Norwood, by saying, because of Sandy Lee that day, the ladder truck, truck 22, never got to the Mattapony apartments. Engine company 22 had to turn around, never got there. Battalion 4 diverted and went to that call where she was the victim, as well as Medic 9. Having worked in several fire departments, such as Washington, D.C., that has tremendous resources, almost 450 people on duty during my watch per day there, we didn't have an extra engine or an extra ladder or an extra ambulance or chief. And I think Sandy's point was, when you get injured, it's dumb. Not only can you not be aggressive, you simply can't do your job. And not only in that case, it changed your life forever. The second quick story I want to share about being safe and how critical it is comes from a magazine article that Chief Halton allowed me to put together for the last edition of Fire Rescue magazine. It ran in June, and I described it as a trilogy about a phase piece, and it was bad days and worse nights. The case studies that I had a chance to put together, I lived through each and every one of those. And in the first case, unfortunately, the member takes off his face piece and he succumbs to his injuries. Couldn't tell you how horrible it was. It took him 6 days to pass away. I dealt with the family. The first words out of the doc's mouth is, Chief, you have one job in this situation, and that's to prepare the family to lose their father, their husband, their brother, their son. It was just horrible. The second case study, a firefighter had his face piece knocked off, or in some way it became dislodged. By being in Washington, D.C., I would always visit the burn center at Washington Hospital Center. The burn unit there is amazing. And I just happened to be there the day that he got extubated. And the doc says, dig this, Paul, the doc says, when we take the tube out, you're going to feel like you're under a fishbowl for a while and you won't be able to catch your breath. And he says, if at any point you need me to stop, raise your hand. So here's a 22 or 3-year-old, what I'm going to call true firefighter warrior. And they brought him awake. They asked him to explain what was going on. They started to extubate him. And as soon as the tube came out, he was waving his hand like a little girl. Just absolutely couldn't breathe, had to be reintubated. And I thought, I wish every firefighter in America could watch that. And then finally, the case study where the firefighter actually has a hole burned through his face piece. And he puts his hand over the face piece, thinking that all he has to do is clear it. And as he's trying to clear what he thought was condensation, the plastic is melting literally to his glove. Obviously too hot of an environment. Thank God he survived. That would be another person that would be a high-level candidate for that burn garment that we spoke about. But once again, they ran out of the building and couldn't do their job because of injuries. So I'd hope everybody would factor that in. I am an old school person. I will always be associated with a particular engine company. I like that kind of work. They tell me that truck companies always cut holes in the roof, Bobby Halton, so that they can see real firefighters at work. But bottom line is, when you're hurt, you can't help no one.
Yes, Chief, I appreciate you bringing up those stories. And one of those unfortunate line of duty deaths, I have to comment on the death of firefighter Solomon when you were in chief in Atlanta, and comment on your leadership following that line of duty death. And I know we've spoke face to face on this. As a young officer, you really touched me on how you handled that line of duty death. and the whole entire city of Atlanta and the department on bringing everybody through that very small one-story structure where firefighter Solomon was burned and then later succumbed from his injuries, where that story and that line of duty death is still being used to have a positive impact on firefighters today and legacy, but also your legacy of your leadership and how you handled that. So every time we talk about that, I have to thank you.
That day it ended a man's life. Those companies are affected forever. I do see some of the people who were there, and it's had a deep and profound effect by receiving that injury. So not only is saying stay makes sense, but it allows you to be aggressive. It allows you to do the job and the type of work and the kind of work that we want to do.
Yep. So thank you for bringing that line of duty death up, because your leadership during that time was unremarkable, that I've learned lots from, and I know has helped make me a better officer. So thank you. I'd like to go to Chief Dennis McCarthy here in Fairfield, and Chief, kind of get your opinion on this. You've had a small geographical area compared to Chief Rubin, that you've been chief of a couple different departments now. I'd like to hear your perspective, and we could bounce this back to Chief Halton after that, because coming from New Mexico Fire Department, where he was a chief officer, we could really get a good going here. And I'm going to check Twitter, see if we have any questions.
So one of the challenges we've had in New England and Connecticut and in the 3 departments I've served in is firefighter fitness. And I think that, being prepared to do the job when you show up at the firehouse and throughout your shift, now that are running 24 and in some cases 36 hours, firefighter fitness and being prepared for the fight is a critical part of, and I think it's the foundation of firefighter safety. And all of the other arguments and discussions really flow from an expectation that our firefighters are prepared to do the job physically and medically. And I was fortunate when I worked for the Westport Fire Department in 1998. We developed a fitness program that is still flourishing today. And there's active, on-duty, supervised training, fitness training. And one of our first exercise physiologists that came in to work with us, Peter Ronay, who's now at Sacred Heart University, stressed the notion of this is not, hey, I work out at the gym, I run, I'm capable of doing the job with the stresses of the job, with the best of them. The stress of firefighting and all of the systems, the energy systems that are needed to do this job effectively, really require a concerted effort by the department, by the union, by town government to support it, recognizing that somewhere for every dollar spent, they're saving, and because that is important. Environment, that there is savings, and it may not be clear to them initially, but this is so critical to firefighter safety. And if you look at the line of duty death reports that come out of the U.S. Fire Administration, and we look at every one of them and share them with every member of the department when they come out. If we stop firefighting altogether, we're still going to lose between 50 and 75 firefighters every year for things unrelated to firefighting. And a lot of that has to do with preventions that really need to be addressed. So I think from a command level, from a community level, from union leadership level, attention to firefighter fitness and wellness has to be a discussion that is of paramount importance to all of those groups, because we cannot address firefighter safety without addressing those key issues.
I think those are great points, Chief. Chief Halton?
Yeah, Chief, I can't, I would just like to echo just for a moment that your point on physical fitness, and there's a plethora of opportunities to get a better handle on how we do that, right? How we manage it. Danny Kerrigan has a great book out on firefighter functional fitness. Jordan Pounder out of Milwaukee has an amazing program that he puts together on functional fitness. Ed Hatfield out of California. You've got the O2X folks, Adam LaRue and Paul McCullough. Those guys have put together an incredible program. And to the Chief's point, it's not just going to the gym and working out. It's about fitness in terms of your nutrition, your sleep habits, your mental health, It's a total wellness package these days that we're starting to embrace, which I think is really important. And part of it even is what they're now calling mindfulness, which I was raised by a Jesuit priest, so we were taught that as part of our basic curricula as a kid in grammar school. And we used to call it daily reflection. Now it's gotten a little more secular, and it's become called mindfulness, which is excellent. And it's a big piece of it, right? As we talk about things like the USAF reports, and we talk about line of duty reports, and if you haven't had a chance to read Chief Rubin's article, which was just amazing, when we look back, we have to be able to reflect and empathize and try to understand why the folks that were in that situation at the time made the decisions they did, right? What was moving them towards thinking that those outcomes would be successful? And part of what we do, and we're talking about safety on the fire ground and safety in general, is basically what's called a threat assessment. We've called it a size up for a long time, but really a size up is a threat assessment. In other words, what are we facing? Is it a hazardous material spill? Is it a plane crash? Is it an automobile accident? Is it unknown, right? Is it a call for chest pain, which could turn out to be a shooting? Is it a person down? Could turn out to be a narcotics call, and it could be a very dangerous environment. So our size up is really a mini threat assessment, but we do that all the time. So what the Chief McCarthy was just talking about is we know there's a picture, if you will, for lack of a better word, or a snapshot of what the overall job of the firefighter is, and there's a physical kind of set of parameters that you should be able to operate in. And it doesn't mean that you can't be a few pounds overweight or a few pounds underweight, and you don't have to be, I was going to say a Jack LaLanne, but I don't think anybody but me and Ruben would understand, and maybe Chief McCarthy would understand who Jack was. But right, you don't have to be the Incredible Hulk, right? You just need to be. You need to be agile. You need to be nimble. You need to be conditioned. Your cardiovascular, that should be first, right? If your heart and your mind are good, you can work as a team. So I think in terms of threat assessment, what the Chief was talking about is what we do beforehand. Are we physically fit? Are we emotionally fit? Are we ready to do the job, right? And then there's the on-scene threat assessment, which is the company officer level of that safety envelope. In other words, what are my folks up against today? Does our training match it? Do our resources match it? Do we know what we're really up against, right? And then what's really beautiful, and what Chief Rubin was kind enough to write about the other day, and what I liked about the article was, let's evaluate that experience. And not to throw stones and say they zigged when they should have zagged, but to say, wow, I might have made that same decision had I not known this or this, or I can see where that may have happened, or gosh, maybe that's why our face pieces, some of the face pieces that the Chief referenced were before the new standard. The new standard now picks your face piece up to about 520 degrees, which is nothing compared to the temperatures you're going to encounter in a residential structure fire. So our face pieces are a vulnerable piece of our envelope, and so are the seals around our face pieces. So we need to be aware of the limitations. We often talk about our bunker gear, which can go up to 1,200 degrees. We know that for a short period of time, but it's that what's the weakest link? If your face piece isn't going to withstand that kind of temperature. So that's part of that safety envelope. And I think it's important that we discuss it. And I don't think, and I'll just say this to PJ's point, please reach out on Twitter. I don't think that safety can ever interfere with operations. I just think it's impossible morally and ethically. In other words, if the operation isn't inherently safe, and I mean, we take risks, right? We're going to take risks when necessary, right? If there's a human life involved, we're going to put ourselves at tremendous peril to try to rescue someone. I'm not saying not take risks, but even take Jimmy Lee, who just this year lowered himself off a 5-story building on fire with fire lapping up to effect a rescue of a gentleman who was trapped at a window, a viable patient at a window. Heroic rescue. Well, Jimmy didn't do it haphazardly. He rated the anchor. He knew his team knew where he was going. The ground crews knew he was coming out. They afforded Jimmy every possible level of safety that they possibly could before he did that incredibly dangerous and risky and heroic rescue. And it was all of those things. But they did it in the safest possible way. And I have a friend, a great friend, Jason Bresler, who's a beautiful friend and an outstanding guy. Leadership Under Fire, if you ever have a chance to take one of his courses, absolutely brilliant firefighter, decorated Marine, one of the finest human beings on the face of the planet. He doesn't like the word safety. He likes to use other words because he goes, we're not doing stuff safe. And we argue about it, and it's great, and I love him. But it's just a word. If you want to use a word like carefully, if you want to use a word like mindfully, if you want to use a word like deliberately or cautiously, whatever word floats your boat, right? But safety works for me. So I would counter to PJ that I think it is morally and ethically and in terms of good firefighting impossible to separate or impossible for safety to interfere with credible operations. And I use the word credible or authentic or authentic or legitimate operations. Now, something that's illegitimate or stupid, yeah, safety can get in the way of stupidity. Ask my third wife. But I'm just kidding. I've only been married once to the same lovely girl for 44 years this August. So safety can only impede stupidity, which isn't a bad thing.
I wish you were with me when I was having this debate with the friend of mine, Chief, because you could have, we could have got to our other activities a lot. Statement, because I couldn't agree more. And I try to take the stance of if safety equals being smart. Like Jimmy Lee, they did that operation. They were smart about it. They did it to the best ability that they could, utilizing all the protective measures that they possibly could. And yes, they took a calculated risk, but a calculated risk to save a life, which they did. We can push down a hallway. It doesn't mean we're not going to put our mask on. Are we doing it safer with our mask? Absolutely. We're utilizing the protective measures through the needs assessment or the risk assessment that the chief officers have taken, and we're putting those procedures in place to do our job in the safest manner possible. And it doesn't stop us from doing certain things. And if it does stop us from doing things, we probably shouldn't have been doing it to begin with. And that's that whole host of other good words that Chief Walton utilized. So I do agree with you, Chief. I'd like to see what the Twitterverse says today, if they agree or if they disagree with us. Chief McCarthy, what's your opinion on this?
These have to be planned events. Those unusual that we're faced with on the fire ground when some of these very dangerous or risky evolutions are required, they need to be planned. They need to, one, be practiced beforehand, but be planned so that, as the Chief Halton was saying, that every part of that operation is managed, whether it's the inside team, the roof team, the ground team, the command team, that every part of that operation has been thought of and planned out so there are no surprises. We had, once the plan starts, there aren't any good ideas, execute the plan. Because if everybody is operating on plan A, someone has a brainstorm, I'll modify it midstream and try something different, it throws the rest of the team into disarray. So, following the plan, having a good plan, and, fireground lend itself to a very long, thoughtful process, and that's where the training beforehand, everybody understands when we execute the plan how it is intended to go.
I just wanted to interrupt for a second just to give a shout out to the Can Man, Healthy EMTB. Thank you for the great comments we've got. He agrees. He calls it, they call it scene assessment. Thank you for that. Sonny O'Connor, always good to hear from Sonny. Sonny says, hey, if you don't think fitness matters, give me a call. And Sonny can tell you his story, which is amazing. And then Chief Rubin, your good friend Dick Delia, D-E-L-I-A, I hope I'm saying that correctly. Dick says hello, and he says, you wouldn't make a pimple on a good fireman's butt. I'm not sure if I've got that exactly right, Chief. I'm just kidding. He said you were a great chief, and he wishes you all the best, and he just wanted to give you a shout out. So thank you, Nick,
yes,
for
sir.
standing by. But you know, and just for a quick caveat before I ask Chief Rubin and PJ to continue on the conversation, there are times when men and women have thrown themselves on grenades, and God bless them for doing it. But you always ask why, and it's always for the same reason. It was to ensure the safety and survivability of the people they were with, who they loved dearly. And men and women have done it, and we bless them, and we honor them, and we cherish them, and they didn't do anything wrong or stupid or foolish. They willingly sacrificed themselves to save others. And
for the mission.
For the mission, right. And generally to save the team so that the team could complete the mission. It was always about saving life. No one ever threw themselves on a grenade just to throw themselves on a grenade foolishly. And I'm using that metaphorically, right? And that's a choice. That's what duty's about. And if we're ever called to make that true sacrifice, you know, that's a moment of conscience for all of us. And I've never had to go there, but I know folks that have and have survived it, and God bless them for it. And I've known folks who didn't survive it, and God bless them as well. So we're not saying that there aren't going to be times, because of what we do, the dynamically complex, dangerous job that we have chosen to undertake as a profession and as a calling and as an industry, that may put us in a position, or has put firefighters in position, where they have chosen to do that. But what we are saying is that we want to do everything we can to avoid anyone ever having to make that level of commitment, ever. But that has to be our goal. And I don't think there's any, I can't imagine the argument to the contrary. I just can't imagine it. Sorry.
So before we get to Chief McCarthy, I just want to, real quick, we're a little bit around that halfway point, and I just wanted to make sure that we gave another shout out to our good friend and thank them for their great support. And one thing that we didn't mention, and you know, we all know that 9 out of 10 firefighters are in turnout gear that are made by TenCate Fabrics, but that's not all that they do. They have a wildland division, they have a technical rescue, they have structural firefighting gear, and something newer to me that I was unfamiliar with is their station line wear. So if you're looking to think of the entire package of protective clothing, it's not just the outer layer. You also need to be thinking of your base layer and your station uniforms. So take a look at TenCate Fabrics website. Tell them we said hello and thanks for the support of this show, because we couldn't do it without the support of Penwell Fire Engineering, Chief Long, and TenCate.
And I have to throw out my good friend Mike Cheeks, who helped me with this, is that we're talking about firefighter fatigues now, right? Like gear that we can wear all the time in lieu of wearing our structural gear at a lot of things we go to, whether it's automobile accidents, whether it's, and I don't have a better term for it. Lots of companies make it, find the folks you like, but you know, wearing bunker gear at car accidents and wearing bunker gear at, you know, medical calls and things like that is just not necessary. They make great, what I call firefighter fatigues, just like a military fatigue. With Velcro, you can put your name on it, throw it in the wash. It's fire resistive. It's lighter. It breathes better. And you're not degrading your gear, because even wearing your gear out in the sunlight causes degradation. That light causes degradation. So please go to TenCateFabrics.com. That's TenCateFabrics.com and educate yourself, because there's nothing more important, to quote Tom Brennan, than being a thinking firefighter. Tom Brennan.
Great job, Chief.
So
Chief McCarthy.
I just wanted to comment on your previous line of thought. We shouldn't underestimate the importance of the line firefighter in the safety discussion. To your point, we do this job and we do it well, not because of our commitment, which is there to the community, the commitment to the chief or the governing bodies. We do it for other firefighters, and they hold us to the standard that we perform at. And that holding each other responsible for our actions happens at the engine company level and the ladder company level. You know, firefighters perform well when the expectation from other firefighters is to do just that. And we recognize that every firefighter has a role in this mission, that when things go wrong, it's because other people look the other way, when good people look the other way. and whether it's putting on a seatbelt or wearing your gear, wearing your gloves. We had a firefighter that 2 years into the job, he had a permanent disability, and when it was unable to return to duty because his hands were severely burned at a fire, he took his gloves off, or they got steam burns, and he could never do any heat because of the long-term sensitivity in his hands. Making sure that we all check each other to make sure that we are meeting what the expectation of the department is, which comes from on top, but certainly implemented at the company level. And every firefighter has a responsibility in that.
I agree, and that comes down to often our entry-level firefighters are taught that company officers and the chief officers, and they forget to look to their left and their right and realize or even understand that they have a stake in everything that goes on. And that term that water boils from the bottom. We're talking leadership, that they do have a stake for themselves, but also those around them. And the quote that kind of hit me is, "Never walk by a problem that you can fix, or never overlook a problem that you can fix." You're riding backseat today, and you look over, and your partner riding the hydrant side or the pipe side doesn't have his or her seatbelt on. Make mention to them. If they don't have their gloves on, if they're not masked up, if their hood's not on, if their chin strap's not on for Chief Avillo, or their flaps aren't down, make mention to it. They may have got caught up in the incident there and may have missed that step. It's up to us to look out for each other on those and I say basic, but those basic or the safety features that we should all be taking every day, but we do have to look out for each other. Chief Rubin?
Yes, sir.
Hello, sir. So as a chief officer, how do you effectively communicate those expectations to not only your company officers, but also your line firefighters?
I think it starts off with walking the talk. In other words, you can say a lot of things, you can produce a lot of paper, you can get pretty lofty with words, but how you act is going to be a lot more important. If in fact, when you arrive as a chief officer at the incident, you have the correct level of turnout gear for the hazard zone you're in, that's critical. If you say things like, "We're going to always ensure that we stop at stoplights and stop signs," make sure that the chief's buggy does that as well. I always tend to think that just about every firefighter either is from or has spent time in Missouri, as in the show me state. Don't tell me, but show me. And I think we also don't spend probably enough time rewarding our folks when they do a really good job. At times our job is tough. I would spend a lot of time patting folks on the back for simply doing a good job. They asked if I was going to run for office in Washington, D.C., but I think the expectation was to be appreciative and understand just how difficult the assignments are, and couple that with the need to make certain that we keep our firefighters safe. I wanted to also just mention another area that seems sometimes to get away from us, and that is firefighter accountability. Do we have enough time to drill down into that for just a bit, PJ?
Absolutely. Feel free. We have some time.
To remind everybody, there's 6 questions that have to be answered whenever we go to an incident. And sometimes it's difficult for the incident command, the sector, division, or group, or branch officers to do that. We got to know who the members are, at least by sheer number as to who's there, but hopefully by name. We need to know where they are located at the incident. First floor, second floor, staging perhaps. What actions are they taking? Attacking the fire, providing ventilation would be examples, conducting search and rescue, and what are the conditions? Heavy fire, heavy heat, heavy smoke, what are the exit paths? How will we get those members out of those positions? And of course, have we identified the RIT team? So when we talk about the 6 questions, who they are, where they are, what are they doing, what are the conditions, have we identified the exits, as well as the RIT team for the 6th question. Sometimes when I get to an event, the incident commander, the division, sector, or group, whichever you prefer to call, or perhaps it's a branch, can't answer those questions. It makes me really nervous. We've got to set up accountability early. We've got to provide resources. In our case, we're a pretty small organization, as I mentioned. There's typically about 19 to 25 members on duty operating out of 4 fire stations that I mentioned. So we'll pretty quickly give up one of those companies to develop a RIT team, to provide supported command, and to also assign one member the responsibility to account for all. If you think that you can catch up in an event later, if the event goes bad or if there's a mayday, and make sure that I'm on top of my accountability game after I've neglected it for the first 10 or 15 minutes, you're sadly mistaken. In fact, it's almost laughable at this point in our society, knowing the times that we've failed by trying to catch up. It's got to be done early, as soon as we identify the fact that there's an IDLH environment, immediately dangerous to life and health. Once we cross that threshold, have that accountability system in place. I think that's just absolutely critical. And those 6 questions, Chief, are just imperative that have got to be answered every time.
You know, I just want to add one quick thing to Dennis's point. We just recently did this with my volunteer organization, is that we were looking at accountability, as the Chief was just talking about, and we stumbled across the fact that we go to a lot of events where we don't put on our air packs, and yet accountability is still a critical part of it, right? So we recently got in contact with the Grace Company that make a pass device that we're now wearing on our belts or in our fatigue pockets or on our belts, and they got a great little command board system. It's a great thing. So for all the stuff that we do so we can have greater accountability and be able to give alerts and messages and all kinds of stuff through a pass device. So we're basically wearing a pass device all the time now while we're on duty in order to keep our crews safer, because we do a lot of wildland searches and missing people stuff and stuff along the riverbed and in the woods.
Trench rescue would be another example, Chief. You're exactly right.
Right, and you're not wearing your air pack, so it's a really cool device. Ours came from the Grace Company. They do a whole series of them, and I think a really important piece of the puzzle going forward, because we have great accountability at working fires where people are packed up, but otherwise we don't. We had no way to know if somebody was okay or to get notification other than by going to the radio. And oftentimes that radio airtime was so critical because it was a search and rescue op or whatever. So just a neat little thing we're doing, and if it works for somebody else, hopefully another layer of safety, right?
Yep.
Chief, those are some great points. I'm going to turn it back to Chief McCarthy for a minute. He has a 2 o'clock meeting right in the next room that he needs to get to, so I know he has a few things he wants to add. So before he steps away, I want to give him a last opportunity to offer up into the conversation here.
Well, again, thanks for the opportunity to join 3 great fire service leaders. I really appreciate it. I'm honored to share the webinar with you. I just wanted to match 2 items that were brought up in a different way by both Chiefs Rubin and Halton. The idea of walking the walk. We hear when we run programs, particularly for company officer development, members say, my chief doesn't listen, he's going to do it his way, there is, we can't, they won't support any activity that we want to institute in the department. And, that leadership is, the other part is, being open and doing after action reviews. And if the chief of department is not open to constructive criticism from the rank and file and from his officers, they won't be open to that from their staff. That after action review in most departments is done by shift commanders or company officers, and it should be done for every call. What went right, what went wrong, whether it's an EMS call, a car fire, a dumpster fire, or a structure fire. So I think that there is that responsibility of the chief of department to set that standard and that expectation is there's nothing you can't say, there's nothing you can't ask, and if we have the bravery to do that, we will empower everybody else to do that in the command structure, and we will get better as a result. Yes, of course, there'll be a little bumps in the road, and people may take that to extreme or for other purposes than constructive criticism. But I think it's important that we be honest with our staffs because we are going to learn from, as you said, water boils from the bottom up, and the future of the fire department and the fire service is going to be created by those young firefighters that are just joining. And we are going to set an expectation in how they approach the job by how we approach the job. So I think that, that is, as I mentioned earlier, there's a role for everybody in the fire service, from the most junior member and to the chief of the department. And we all have to play our part and be open and honest and constructive in moving this issue forward.
Those are great points, Chief. And as a an officer that's really good, could kind of check your ego sometimes at the door, and that's always a good reminder to hear for all of us. I do appreciate that, and I really appreciate you joining me here today. And thanks for the space to do this great Google Hangout with Fire Engineering.
Chief, nice to share the time with you, and I will certainly send that $50 along, and hope others do as well.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that, Chief, and thank you for joining us. We know your time is valuable, and it was great to have you on. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Chief.
Chief, if you'll allow me, I'd like to hitchhike on something that I thought was very, very powerful that Chief McCarthy had to share, and that was about the after-action reports. Perhaps one of America's very best operations chief, Chief Larry Schultz in Alexandria, Virginia, conducts a program that he describes as No One Goes Home. I think he's been a contributor and presenter for Fire Engineering for quite a while. And the No One Goes Home, of course, is a play on words from Everyone Goes Home, but it's no one goes home until we reviewed the incident. After an event that has required all hands to work, or perhaps it was unusual, or maybe it went to a multiple alarm, all of the commanders of various units, company officers, division, sectors, groups, branches, are gathered at the command post, and they walk the event down side by side by side. They describe what actions took place. They measured against the protocols, the SOPs, the SOGs, and standards. And then the safety officer has the responsibility to document that discussion amongst those officers so that other folks will learn. Every single event becomes a learning opportunity. They take advantage of that, as well as the officers knowing they're going to be held accountable for their actions based against the standard at every single event. So I applaud him. Again, I'm going to describe him as perhaps one of America's best operations chief. And that program, I got to watch and be the beneficiary of it in Washington, D.C. That's a powerful way of doing business, sir.
Yeah, I definitely agree that those are some great points. And I think the fail point of all after action reports is exactly what Chief McCarthy was discussing, that we all need to be open. We need to understand that no incident goes perfect. We all make mistakes. Tactics will never be perfect. And that once we understand and accept that it won't be perfect, well, let's look at what did not go perfect, or what can we do a little bit better next time. It doesn't mean any one of us are lesser of an officer or less of a person, because we all make mistakes, and that's okay. So make your mistakes, own up to them, share it with others, and move on so those same mistakes aren't made at the next incident as we move forward. So I think that was a great point that the chief brought up. The other thing that, he went into accountability for that fireground accountability. I'm going to turn that word around a little bit of accountability, something we were talking about before, and a little personal accountability. Accountability for ourselves. Accountability to be smarter on the fireground, to be smarter firefighters and smarter officers, so we could understand what mistakes are being made, so we can have a good, safe operation while still upholding the mission statements of our department and offering up the citizens the services that they deserve for us to push down that hallway or go in that window and do it as safe as we can, but still make every attempt to do our job that they're employing us for, or that we're volunteering in their community to do the right thing for them. So I like that word accountability as far as the fireground accountability, but I also like to look at it from that personal accountability. We each need to be personally accountable for our actions to make sure that we're doing everything in the safest manner possible, regardless of what that task is.
I've written a little bit and been very, very fortunate to be a part of the first Pass It On book. I know that you were part of Chief Cole Fetter's second one as well. But in the first one, I talked about self-discipline, self-control. And I think that fits the category that you're talking about. All good firefighters exhibit that characteristic. So do all good members of the military. And part of self-control, self-discipline is to ensure that you follow the safety policies. Is it cool to wear your chin strap? Maybe some folks like to wear it on the back of their helmet. It just looks cooler. a self-disciplined person would clearly understand that that's an integral part of the safety system. And if I can keep that helmet on my head, that face piece is going to stay in place. I'm hopefully going to be able to properly communicate. It just adds, if you will, layers of protection when you do exactly what you say. And again, I'm going to describe that as not just personal accountability, but that personal accountability using that self-discipline. So important. And it's page 341 in that first book, if you're interested.
I am definitely interested, and I will go back. Chief Halton?
It's actually some timeless wisdom. It's if you remember, I believe it was either Seneca or Cato the Elder, an old Roman Stoic, who said, "Most powerful is he who has himself in his own power," and that means self-discipline. So you're only really powerful as an individual and capable and competent and authentic as an individual if you have self-control or self-discipline, right? And that we talked about mental attitude. We talked about physical fitness. We talked about all of that is from within. It's not imposed from without. It all comes from within. There's an old saying in the Marine Corps. A buddy of mine in the Marine Corps used to always tell me they can give us hard work, but they can't make us work hard. You can only make yourself work hard. So great point from Chief Rubin.
And I think those are all great points. I think that we kind of broke this down a little bit, and this topic we can all speak on for hours amongst hours. But we kind of broke it down. We talked about having open and honest communication, physical fitness, being smart, good positive after action reviews, and having that accountability, that personal accountability, but also that fireground accountability. And Chief Rubin, I love your sixth question of who's there, where they are, what actions are taking place, the conditions. Have we identified exits? Have we identified our RIT? I think that's valuable information for the company officers listening today as they're handing over command to that face-to-face command report. And I think it's great for the chief officers or even company officers who are coming in to take over an incident to make sure that those are really 6 solid questions that they're either looking at and asking or that they're providing to the next person coming in to have a safer fireground so all tactics continue moving forward in the safest, smartest manner possible. I think we covered some great things today. And it's these 1 hour or so time blocks are always so tough because, we can always go on and on and on. But I think that this is a good point to turn it back to Chief Rubin to hear his perspective on the show, offer some last tidbits of wisdom, which I know that he always has. Then we'll go to Chief Halton to wrap it up, say thank you to our sponsor, Takata, again, and we'll close out today's phenomenal Google Hangout. Chief Rubin?
Again, couldn't tell you how much I appreciate this opportunity to get a safety message out, how important it is for us to curb firefighter deaths and firefighter injuries. And certainly I think that fire engineering has always been in a leadership role, as well as yourself personally, Chief Norwood. And of course, I think Chief Halton has been the benchmark, if you will, of making sure that our members stay safe. I would just point out, please don't think you have to go it alone. If you're watching or listening to this program now, or perhaps later, there's so much material out there, whether it's from the National Fire Academy or Fire Engineering Magazine, or perhaps it's attending the FDIC. Don't think that all of this is a mountain of work. Someone probably has covered that area before, can probably help you. We'll look forward to helping you. I know I look to both you and Bobby as mentors, and each time I've asked for information or help or assistance, both have always been there, and a host of other people across the United States, and for that matter, our brothers and sisters in Canada as well. So don't feel like you're overwhelmed, and please don't hesitate to reach out and grab someone who I know would be glad to help, and we always hope to see you at the FDIC. Thanks again for allowing me to be part of the show, Paul.
Great words of wisdom. Before I go back to Chief Halton for the last word, building on today's show, Fire Engineering hosts these Google Hangouts every Wednesday of the month. Frank Ritchie and myself host this Google Hangout the 4th Wednesday of the month. Our next Google Hangout in July will be July 26th, and we're going to continue building on this. Recently, Bill Carey has been doing some wonderful things regarding the statistics and the numbers of line-of-duty deaths. And recently, Eric Roden wrote a wonderful piece on line-of-duty deaths. So Frank and I are bringing both them on our show, the Google Hangout on July 26th, to continue this the safety discussion. We're going to be breaking it down and looking at the line of duty deaths and how and the things that we potentially can be doing on the fire ground to make things a little bit safer, as they say. So I'd encourage anybody listening today to make sure you tune in on every Wednesday for the Google Hangouts, but maybe put a little extra time in your schedule on July 26th for Frank Ritchie's Hangout in mine when we start talking with Eric Roden and Bill Carey. So I thank everybody for joining us today, whether you're watching live or watching the archive version. For those of you that submitted to FDIC International for 2018, thank you. Chief Fulton said 1,100 submissions this year. I don't like seeing Chief Fulton work harder than he does, but that's a good work hard, because that means we have 1,100 firefighters across the country who are looking to make things, actually internationally, are looking to make the fire service better, and that's a very positive thing that makes me very, very happy. So thank you for listening. Thank you for joining today. And thank you to Takata Fire Engineering and Chief Fulton for allowing this to go on every Wednesday of the month on Fire Engineering Google Hangouts, and for me to have a very small piece of that. So thank you. Chief Fulton, it's all yours.
Well, thank you to Takata Fabrics, takatafabrics.com, for allowing us to do this. Just a quick point of personal privilege. Please remember, this is the 4th of July weekend coming up. Fireworks and all that good stuff. Please, if you're a volunteer, be ready to respond in case something goes untoward. Enjoy the celebrations. But while you're enjoying the celebrations, remember all the men and women who have sacrificed so greatly so that we can enjoy this day. It's truly an incredible day for the American people, and it should be celebrated that way. And as a point of personal privilege, American military are always keeping us safer. According to Rear Admiral Crane, Chief of Naval Operations Reserves, the Naval Reserve HSC-3 SCORE Det unit yesterday participated in bucket drops in California, a California wildfire, successfully. And I'll be tweeting out a photograph in a moment of my son's helicopter doing a Bambi bucket drop in California, helping federal firefighters be safer. So thank you to our military. Thank you to all our firefighters, law enforcement, everyone who's served, put themselves in harm's way for others. It's truly what it means to be an American. It's the greatest country in the world. It'll always be the greatest country in the world. We are second to none for a reason. The American Fire Service is the most emulated and admired fire service in the world. We have the greatest technology. We have the greatest products. We have the greatest machinery and the greatest electronic systems. But our source of power, as it was in the days of leather-lung firefighters and buckets, has always been that firefighter, you. And on 4th of July, we celebrate you, the American firefighter, who's helped keep this country safe, who's helped fight this country's wars, and who protects its people at the dearest of costs, and who always will. So thank you, God bless you, and enjoy the 4th.